Welcome to this video. This video is a continuation of the former video. Haplogroup R burned all forest and degenerated soils before forming black mats. Further, I argue that the presence of sufficient local organic material on the places where black mats containing charcoal were formed would have been impossible, because any significant amount of organic material, like natural forests, was cut and burned or removed or already absent at the time of the extinctions. This was also the case of Lommel, Belgium, where sands cleared from vegetation and exposed to winds, aeolic forces, would drift and form the typical coversands and sand dunes, long before the formation of the black mats. To allow for coversands to cover the landscape, the areas without significant vegetation must have been extensive and with severely degenerated soils. It is not impossible that Haplogroup R protected their installation and habitats by spreading out tilings, waste and slag to stop the advancing drifting sands that are capable of covering whole houses and communities. This could be very well how the found black mats were formed. First extinction and only much later black mats. The skeletons or fossils of these extinctions come before, in time, or under, in layers, and separate from the black mat that covers the fossils and tools of extinct Clovis-like humans and animals including extinct Megafauna. In these places that black mats would appear later, earlier Magdalenians and Clovis-like humans had been present and active, but still without black mats. I also assume that wind erosion would have been less severe at that time because the landscape and soils still had more patches of forest and were less degenerated. These places almost without doubt offered something special for these cultures, and also the Haplogroup R wanted to be present so much that they made the efforts in overturning and extinct the Clovis-like humans which were their competitors for this and other sites. I claim that the sites offered something special for metallurgy etc., and that is the reason blast furnaces were built in mass and slag was produced in mass, and all industrial waste ended up in the black mats that could have been useful or necessary also to protect against drifting sands that were able to cover any present buildings. Almost ironically, the combination of metallurgical industry and drifting sand dunes went on until the former century. Back then it was not the cutting for fuel, or military-like motives, that destroyed the forests and vegetation in the region, but the high acidic and or toxic fumes of the modern metal industry. This time the extensive drifting sands were not solved with black mats of industrial waste, but with hundreds of hectares of applied black mats, roughly with the same thickness of the Neolithic black mats, but this time formed by the organic waste from the city of Antwerp. The mostly organic city waste was brought to the location by train. The train companies also had interest in stabilizing the drifting sands that disrupted their services on this and other similar locations in a wide region. The city waste black mat was necessary to be able to reforestate and stabilize the soils in the region. Today this same location is partly a reserve, but also an industrial site for reasons that are not so different from the reasons for which the Magdalenians and Clovis-like people occupied it in the Neolithic and possibly very long before. Later and by means of destruction, degeneration, extinction and turnover also newcoming Haplogroup R, modern humans, occupied the same location. This could be at least partly symbolic for what we humans also are, because we modern humans are the Haplogroup R, or rather the descendants of the Haplogroup R that turned over all Clovis-like people, Haplogroup Q, C, I etc. On Western Eurasian scale Haplogroup R added up, caused, the younger DRYAS and the Holocene and added up to the rising of the ocean levels by a further 70 meters. The ocean levels had risen by 50 meters by that time, probably because of even more extreme similar events before. What happened in Western Eurasia happened before in most of the rest of the world, except in that case there were several other haplogroups, mosaic, involved, but as an example Haplogroup O was certainly an important haplogroup adding up to similar consequences. For me there is a common line in what happened on a global scale, it is about the hybrid era, and the hybrids come in mass from their near-continental scale Haplogroup R Cradles in North America, the case of Western Eurasia, as well as Haplogroup O Cradles in Australia etc. I prefer to keep the location and extension of the Australian cradle open, in the case of East Asia etc. Adding up all hybrids of the hybrid era one can safely say they caused the younger DRYAS and other similar periods, altogether the Holocene and caused the ocean levels to rise by 120 meters. I claim that before they started turning over the world they were aware the ocean levels would rise and they prepared for it. They also were aware the climate would change, but this time they were not sufficiently prepared. The combination of soil, climate and genome degeneration made the empire collapse and fragment rather quickly, most of it roughly starting around the late Bronze Age collapse, presenting famines, plagues and pests, and the year 1000, and over time most of the old knowledge got lost and what was left was destroyed. Observation. I presented a bit more detailed information only about Lommel, Belgium, but I can assure I studied several others and some are similar and others present the same pattern. So while studying and presenting more YDB sites, the essentials will not change, only more details and a better overview will be the result. Observation. The medieval Great Famine, 1315, and the Black Death, 1347, came soon after the year 1000 and can be seen as an extension of the collapse I mentioned. In their wake lots of agriculture was abandoned, and forests were able to recover and obviously to sequester CO2 from the atmosphere to put it down in their rebuilding living biomass, trees, and gradually enriching soils, with carbon under the form of organic material. This is a kind of a twisted return to some kind of low-grade agroforests. The climate cooled and the Little Ice Age took hold starting soon after the Great Famine and Black Death. Intermezzo Britannica 2023. Little Ice Age, LIA, climate interval that occurred from the early 14th century through the mid-19th century, when mountain glaciers expanded at several locations, including the European Alps, New Zealand, Alaska, and the southern Andes, and mean annual temperatures across the northern hemisphere declined by 0.6 degrees Celsius. End of intermezzo. While I do not want to come to any definitive conclusions, this is without a doubt something we should think about and study better. To do so we will have to let go of some misleading assumptions that are kind of part of our culture. Further, I am not against agriculture at all. Agriculture is the area that will play and will have to play a major role in all solutions of the perfect storm. It will however have to embrace more elements from the agroforests like the Amazon Amerinds practiced agroforest in their deep past. The evidence is disappearing but still there for us to reach out. The right kind of enriched agroforest elements would not prejudice agriculture or industry at all, it would make agriculture, forestry, and modern humans thrive once more. End observation. This video is about the hypotheses of the author, J.M., and not about present-time climate change. Further, I am convinced that all initiatives of and info provided by the UN regarding climate are very useful and necessary. To learn about present-time climate change, please consult. What is climate change? United Nations. Thank you for watching. Bye.